nice young kid, native looking boy, black hair, black dark complexion, shiny boots with his blue jeans rolled up, riding an Enfield Twin. And I thought, and all I could do is look out the window and I'm thinking, boy, I want to do that. You know, I want to do that. And that's how it started, I guess. As soon as I was 17, I couldn't get a bike at 16. My father refused to allow me to have such a thing. So it was 17 before I was able to bring a bike home and say it was somebody else's. It started in his mechanical garage in his shop for about 2 months, and finally he asked me, well, like, when's this kid coming to get this bike? By then the weather was good and I was ready to ride. That's how that went. In front of his oil rack display, there was a nice little spot I could store this thing. It was a 62 Triumph Thunderbird, so therefore it had the great big balanced front fender, and the back of the motorcycle was all enclosed like a huge scooter. Very sought after today, of course, now that there isn't any, and people did what I did. While it was sitting there, not being my bike, I took the bathtubs, they called them, the enclosure off the back, and put alloy fender on the back and put an alloy fender on the front to lighten it up, make it look more like this motorcycle, as compared to a huge scooter. So anyway, come spring, I'm wanting to ride the bike. I'm at the insurance company and they're telling me, well, your father told us not to insure that motorcycle because he didn't want you to have one. I says, well, now what am I going to do? I says, I'm going to work in half an hour and I'm taking that motorcycle. Into the garage I go, went upstairs first and got my lunch. It had a rack on the top of the gas tank. So I went, tied my lunch on there, rolled the bike over. Now this was, never had my rear end on a motorcycle to this point, other than a little 65cc Yamaha that I drove around a guy's driveway. So this is this 650 Triumph, and I'm in my dad's garage. I get it out, I got it fired up, and I'm ready to go, and he pulls down the big overhead door to let me out of the garage. He pulls it down so I can't get out. Well, I was a little headstrong then. They say I've gotten over that a little bit. But anyways, I says to him, you better open that door because I'll go right through her. So I revved it up a little bit and let the clutch out a little wee bit and jumped ahead. He lifted up the door and I went off to work. No license plate on the bike or no insurance. Guess what I had the next day? I had insurance and a license plate. That's all it took. And he's been all right with it since. He's dead and gone now, of course, years ago, but he was fine after that. And then when I went to go to South America, to Venezuela, in '68, he just couldn't see a guy doing that on a motorcycle and thought that I was never coming back. Pretty upset about that he was, but I made it there and back. Still making it today. Still having fun. Because that's what it's all about, I guess. If you're not having fun, you better quit. The odd person still wants one restored or some work done on them, and I'm up for that. But not a business. I don't want to ever start a business now. I just want to keep busy. Yeah, I got 2 to do this winter. A Norton, same as this Norton here, except it's a, I'll get it right here, an interstate. So it's got the huge tank and the pipes come down more level, square at the back, flat at the back, if you will. So you can put saddlebags on it. And that's what he's going to do. He's probably going to ride that, and I'll maybe license this one next year and ride it instead of my 500 Triumph. I got it, and there's a one underneath the cover there belongs to a woman. Boy, she's past the girl stage. But when she had that, she was 17 years old. It's a 67 Bonneville that's been all chopped up, and she wants it all put back together again. So I've got to measure it up and see what it needs and give her a call and get some money coming and start doing that. Those 2 little jobs will keep me busy for the winter. Finishing my 73-year-old. That'll do it. And I've got the tank off of this one, so I won't bang it while it's in storage. So I brought it out, and I'm going to put the gas tank and seat on it, and it'll go downstairs in my rec room for the winter. I have a dragster in the basement too that how does it go now? It was the fastest naturally aspirated vertical twin in the British Empire. It doesn't have the engine together in it because the engine was lent to somebody, a dirt tracker, an old dirt tracker, who got the bottom end of the engine and never did put it into his frame before he died. He was way up there in his, I mean, he was 70 some odd years old. Don McHugh was his name, and Donnie borrowed the engine and to put into his dirt tracker, and it never got in there, and then Don died, so you know, you kind of lose that engine. It's gone now. You can't go into somebody and say, gee, that's our engine. So it's gone. So I've got pieces and things that I've been gathering. It'll probably end up being a static display for the museum, our vintage museum. I can't see ever getting it running again because there's too many very expensive engine parts that aren't there. Crankshaft, pistons, connecting rods, cams, things like that that were special to that bike. But it'll make a nice static display in the museum, I think. At least it'll look good in my rec room altogether if it doesn't go anywhere else. But that could be a job I could get our vintage boys interested in, coming and giving me a hand in the wintertime and getting them out of the house for a few hours a night. Maybe we can get that together by spring, get it over to the museum. That would be the ideal thing to do before the fellow that built and was the mechanic on that bike passes away. He's getting way up there in age too now. The fellow that was riding the Triumph, Al McElvena, wanted to ride Harleys, so he started to build these Harley dragsters, and all of a sudden the Triumph was left by the wayside, but his brother-in-law raced the Triumph dragster, and Jim McElvena, that's his father, that's Al's dad, was the one that built it, the Triumph, and mechanic. He was a mechanic for it too. He's up there, he's got to be 90 years old now, and I'd like to have it assembled into one piece and taken to the museum while he's still with us. He's quite a boy, a real nice man too. That's where I bought the '68 Triumph I took to South America. I found out that it was available from the Burke's. It was Burke was the distributor, and out of London, I believe he was. And they had the big new dealer meeting for the '68 bikes. And when they were finished with the motorcycles, what they would do is put all the names in a hat of the people that were there, and they'd draw the names out of the hat for whichever motorcycle that they were going to get. So that's how they got these bikes that they brought over for the show. At the last show, they would distribute these motorcycles to the dealers. And I phoned around and found out that Jim McElvena had this one up here at Max Motorcycles, the one I took to South America, and made him a deal, and away I went with that. And I end up back here in Peterborough again. Yep. And Jim turned out to be a good friend after all that. I don't know what we're going to do anymore with all of these rules for our gas and stuff that we're getting and our oil. It's not the same oil, it's not the same gas. These things don't like that. It's all good. Oh, the oil's terrible. Like it says, the sign up there, Castrol GTX oil. So all the books for these old 60s bikes use Castrol GTX oil. You don't want to be using that stuff. It's car oil now, and it's as thin as tea compared to what the GTX was like when we were using it as in the 60s. It's not the same oil. They have engineered it for cars with catalytic converters on, so therefore they've cut back on the zinc, they've cut back on the phosphorus that's in the oil as a lubricant. For high pressure lubricant, they've got rid of all that, and it's just not the same. I took a top end of a brand new restoration out. That's how I knew all about that. I started learning about that about 8 years ago. Well, there's still oil now that's available for what they call a flat tappet cam, And that's what we're dealing with here, is a flat tappet cam, a flat tappet rubbing on a cam. So what you've got is pressure from valve springs pushing down, and this rubbing continuously like this. If you don't have a good additive package to that oil, it's not going to stand up to the wear. So what we're using now is, Castro does make an oil, and it's specifically for motorcycles. That's available. And I'm using another one that we use in race cars, Kendall. Oh, yeah. Kendall makes a 2050 bike for 2050 oil for flat tappet cams for both cars and motorcycles. So that's what we're using. But the gasoline's another story. It's terrible on anything plastic, any of the fuel lines now that are built for these things. They get hard in about 2 years and become brittle. You can just break them in half. It's just not good. Whoever thought that they could foist that upon us and sell it to us as a good thing did a great job. That's all I gotta say at sales, because it's no good. Never stopped. Haven't stopped since. Just rode one to Venezuela in '68. Well, actually, as far as David, Panama, from Niagara Falls, and it was quite an adventure. I was gone for almost a year, 11 months actually. Yeah, it was just went to find myself. Everybody was looking to find themselves in those days. And that's what I was doing. Could have been problems, I suppose, if we were looking for them, but we just never bothered to be looking for trouble. We enjoyed ourselves. Dave Horsley was my friend, and he rode a BMW, and I rode one of these. Single carburetor job, a Triumph TR6 from the year '68. I got it a little bit early before. In fact, I bought it in October of '67 and broke it in and was all ready to take it away in January. We left January the 8th in '68. Headed out from Niagara Falls, and away we went. The odd bit of snow. My father, I can still remember, and say, "Now remember," he says, "be careful of those skites." Well, what's a skite? Well, that's where the snow blows across the road, he says. It'll be shiny and it's shined up there. He says, it'll be slippery. Be careful of those skites. So we escaped the skites until we got to South Carolina, North Carolina, I guess it was. And it was freezing rain, and we drove through freezing rain for too many hours. Survived it, never had any problems. Got to where we were going, spent the night, got up the next day to a fresh, brand new day. And the weather was perfect from that day on. Never saw rain. Not till we got back home. But, you know, when you own a motorcycle, it needs attention, and they all do need attention at one point or another. These, of course, needing more than your Honda today, where you punch the button and drive it away and never look at the drive chain or the tire pressure. We were continuously making sure the bike was ready to go, because we were, back in those days, I was with the Welland County Motorcycle Club, and we had our own racetrack down there. But we, as a group, 3 or 4 or 5 of us, would head away on a Friday night to East Palestine, Ohio, to hill climbs, or to Columbus, Maryland for dirt track races, or we were always gone someplace. On a Friday night, we'd head out of Niagara and go to Cumberland, Maryland to a dirt track race, and back home again in time to go to work for Monday morning. Stay on the highway at steady 60, 65 miles an hour until you needed gas, and jump off and fill her up full of gas, and a little stretch, and jump back on, and away you go again. That was the way things were done. That's why these things didn't last so long. In merry old England, you'd put 10,000 miles on it maybe in 6 years. We were putting 10,000 miles on them in a season, wearing the top ends out and stuff, so can't afford to take it to a shop, so you're doing it yourself. That's why there was so many of them laying beside refrigerators and furnaces down in people's basements. They'd get apart and never got back together again. So there was quite a heyday of buying those things in the mid to late 60s and early 70s. Everybody had one in their basement. So that's how I basically got started into restoring them and fixing them. And now I'm at the age I am now, where not too many people know a whole heck of a lot about these bikes that are 40 and 50 years old. Great, that's my era. So I get the odd call. Can you do this? Can you do that? Would you restore this bike or build me a bike? I built a couple of bobbers for guys in town here, two of them in town, that just wanted a bike a little bit different. So I put something together on paper and got some pictures together, and between that, we got a motorcycle together for them. It's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. But, you know, you see a lot of jobs in your day. You go out to buy a motorcycle and you're hearing they're all restored. All restored to some people means a fresh paint job on the fenders and gas tank and maybe wipe the mufflers off with an oily rag. That's not restored. Restored is made to look like brand new again. Is restored. And they all don't need that either. You don't want to be restoring a motorcycle like my 7500 here that's got 4,000 miles on it, albeit poorly stored before I ever got it. I have no intentions of making that bike look like this one, because they're only original ones. This one was so tough that it needed a complete beautification from top to bottom. And there it is, a nut and bolt restoration on a 69 Triumph Bonneville is what this thing is here. And I've got my little Norton. It's a pretty nice bike, big torque. More torque in this Norton than in a Triumph. Even that 750 that I'm building up here, 750 Triumph. The Norton's got the brute torque, and there's no mistaking it from any Triumph. Oh, these are, yeah, a lot of people are vintage racing them. There's a couple of guys at Niagara Falls were racing them and were quite successful. And now they've become Honda 4-cylinder racers. There seems to be more of those around now for parts and things, and easier, just as easy to work on. But yeah, they were a great motorcycle in their day. Of course, you know, being British, there's things on there that could have been done easier. Yeah. My dad used to say, in fact, I remember, I had a Norton Atlas, a 65 Norton Atlas in 66, and it had broken a gear in the transmission. So I went and got the gear, and got the bike all apart, took the primary off, and I'm going to take the transmission apart. So I get the transmission, start to get into it, and my father comes over and he's got a rubber hammer that he's used for putting hubcaps on the cars back in the day. And he hands me the rubber hammer and he says, here, he says, put this down there beside you. I said, I won't need that. He says, oh yeah. He says, before you get started, he says, you take that rubber hammer and you bang yourself on the side of the head about 4 times with it, and you'll be in the same state of mind that the guy was that designed that thing. He says, you'll have no trouble. Yeah. Yeah, there's things you remember, you know, little stuff. But it's been fun. And now, this is what I do in the wintertime. Summertime's all yard work. Wintertime, this is where I spend my time in my little home workshop. My wife can find me quite easily just across the breezeway. She doesn't have to worry about me being gone.